Quick question. What does ECA have in common with salons? Well, walk-ins are welcome. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with part 1 of this 3-part video series on this 1/16 scale radio-controlled M36B2 Jackson tank destroyer. The model that you see here was built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This model here underwent quite an extensive detail upgrade, and basically every single surface was enhanced in order to polish up the build to the way we see it here. In addition to the detail aspects, several mechanical modifications were made to the model as well, and in order to go over all this information in one video would just be way too time consuming. So this model, just like with many of the other 1/16 scale builds found on this channel, is going to be parsed out in a 3-part video series. Part 1, we're going to be going over the original condition that the model was in, as well as the various upgrades and enhancements that were made to the model during the build. Part 2 is going to focus exclusively on the external details on the completed finish. And on the 3rd installment, we're going to be taking this model out for a test drive. So with that in mind, there's a boatload of info that's going to be coming right at you, so just sit back and enjoy the show. And here's the model at the start of the project, or at least it's inside this really slick looking carry case, but we'll get to that in a second. What's housed inside the slick carrying case is a 1/16 scale radio-controlled M36 Jackson tank destroyer. Specifically, an M36 tank destroyer from the company Mato. For those who have been into the 1/16 scale market for a while, the name Mato should sound familiar to you because Mato is one of the larger radio-controlled tank companies, and they produce a wide range of 1/16 scale models and also accessories that are on the market. The Mato claim to fame is that all of their tanks are made out of metal. Literally, the whole tank is metal, from the hull to the turret, suspension, all that stuff. They're all made out of a die-cast metal alloy of one flavor or another. For anyone who's a fan of the channel, you'll know this is by far not the first Mato tank that I've had the opportunity to work on. This is currently my 3rd. The other 2 that came before this was the early production Tiger 1 and their M4A3 Sherman. Both of those, of course, have full video series found on the ECA channel, and I would recommend checking them out if you're into just learning more about these kits and exactly what they give you and what can you do with them. The other 2 were also built for commission, so this one is literally no different. It's following in the same skies. And even though I do not have any personal builds of mine in my own collection that are Matos, I would love to get some at some time, but time, as we all know, is a factor. But outside of that, I've also heavily utilized Mato accessories on lots of other vehicles that I brought up to the channel in the past. Namely, the Sherman. Their tracks are, in my opinion, the best 1/16 scale radio-controlled metal tracks that you can get for the Sherman pattern of vehicles, and that's something that still reigns true today. But back to this one over here. Mato went ahead and released this model in the 2010s timeframe, I want to say. So these things have been on the market now for about 10 years, and they are actually pretty cool. For a while, Mato was basically just mirroring what Hen Long was doing, as well as Tegan, where, for instance, you had a Tiger 1, which the original Mato Tiger 1s were literally just the Hen Long ones, just molded in die cast. And as the years went on, they would go ahead and swap that out and change some aspects of the mold, making it more their own. And same can also be said to the Sherman, their Panzer III, and also their Stug 3, yes, their Stug is also one that comes to mind, that followed a similar format. However, towards the mid-2010s timeframe, they went ahead and started actually tooling up their own products, and 2 of which was very interesting. One was an M10 tank destroyer, and the other was an M36 Jackson. This one definitely being the latter. These models, of course, are still in wide production and can be found today via the usual sources, i.e. eBay and most certainly AliExpress. If you're one of those people that are a Dodge Boomer type and you don't want to shop on AliExpress or on eBay, well, then you're basically going to be SOL, because that's generally where you buy these things, is online. The models also come in a multitude of configurations. You have them as a RTR version where it is all fully painted and it's ready to go out of the box. There is the all-metal version where it's all ready to run. You only have to do is paint it. And then they have, I believe, a version where it's gutted, doesn't have any electronics, and of course you're on the hook to go ahead and outfit it to any way you wish. In addition to that, they also part everything out separately, and you could buy the hull, the upper hull, the turrets, all the little fittings, again, separately to do with it, again, whatever your project needs. So that's one thing about Mato that I personally like, is the fact that they do that. This build here is one of my first opportunities to go ahead and actually work on one of the pre-painted versions from Mato. Spoiler alert, this is one of the completed ones. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what the model looks like in its factory format. The model itself, I'm not sure if it had any other modifications made by the builder. I believe he may have swapped a radio or something along those lines. However, I'm a little hazy on that. As I mentioned before, this is a commission build, and this is indeed a walk-in. The individual, or I should say the owner of this model, went ahead and contacted me through Facebook. We chatted a little bit on Messenger. Then, since he was local, he decided to just swing by the shop, drop the model off, and here it is for all you to see. So obviously from here it's going to be worked on in more depth. But as for any modifications that he made, I believe he tried to add a clear coat or something to the paint, and which brought him down the rabbit hole on why the model's sitting here on my table, and I'm filming it for all you to enjoy. Back to the actual kit itself. So the Mato models, it's not uncommon for them to come in this fancy carrying case like we see here. I believe their Sherman also came in a case like this. I want to say their Tiger did also. This is just, again, done purely for showmanship. I'm not really sure if it's an option or not. It's a little hazy. It's been a while since I actually ordered a Mato tank. But something like this is commonly seen, specifically with the pre-painted one. As for the quality of the case, it's really well made. Like I said before, it's something that you would see in one of those Hollywood action movies where someone has a warhead or something in here and they always have to diffuse it or something along those lines. But anyway, as for the case itself, it's aluminum, bolted together, and again, it's pretty good for what it is. Time to go ahead and pop it open. I have these two little latches right here. Let's actually look at what's inside the case. All right, opening the thing brings us the model in question. As I mentioned before, obviously it's an M36, specifically it's an M36B2 Jackson. The B1 is the version with the standard M4A3 lower hull, and that, by the way, is another variant of this vehicle that is produced by Mato. So you can get either the M36B1 or the M36B2. It just depends on which one you prefer. With the model removed, nothing really much going on here. Outside of the case, you can see it's really nicely padded, and again, it's good quality for what it is. Go ahead and get this guy off the table, and now we can focus more on the actual vehicle in question. Of course, being an M36, it's based on the lower hull from the M4A3, and needless to say, they just simply recycled the lower hull from the M4A3. We'll be circling back to that as the video goes on, but it has the exact same features, same running gear, same gearbox, same track, all of that good stuff. That's all been rinsed, washed, and repeated. What makes this model obviously different is the upper hull and upward. So here you can see the M10 upper hull. More specifically, this would be an M10A1 upper hull. The reason why I say that is because it has the engine deck here for the Ford GAA gasoline V8. The original M10 had the drive system of the M4A2 being the dual GM diesel engines, but eventually when the US wanted to standardize on their engines, they focused on the Ford V8, and when they did, all of the M10s that had the conversion done were known as M10A1s. Reason why I mention that is because since this vehicle, or I should say this, one of the other options made by Mato is an M10, that M10 is technically, not technically, it is an M10A1 because it has the same engine grill set that we have here. So that is definitely something you want to be aware of. Another thing that identifies the lower hull from an M10A1 is the travel lock. We see here it has the little tiny non-retracting travel lock found right there on the back, and this is only found on the M10. This is not proper for an M36. The M36 had the same Sherman type travel lock that's generally found in the front, but relocated to the rear. Obviously that is going to be one of the changes made to this model as we move on. With the camera readjusted, you get a better look at the rear section detailing. So first, let's start with the bottom area. So we have the same incorrect pattern of exhaust manifolds found on this one, as were found on the Mato M4A3. As I mentioned in that other video, these ones are hollow. Unfortunately, one, there's no smoke system found stock on these models, and the smoke system geometry is completely off. This is not what the smoke manifolds look like, or the exhaust manifolds look like on the M4A3. As the video goes on, these are going to be replaced with the proper ones, and of course, you'll see what that looks like. We also have here the opening hatch, which, as I mentioned in the Sherman video, it's a bit dubious in value. One, it doesn't really do anything in that there's no switch or anything back here. And the other problem is that you can't really open it all the way because it strikes some equipment on the inside. And on top of that, the part that would be attached to the hatch, right over there, is actually molded to the hull. So again, you're not really gaining anything by having this piece as a functional component. On the back though, we still have the tow hitch and the tow hitch mount. Those look excellent, as do the tow, or the tow points look good as well. The idler mounts are also good. I mean, the only thing that's there is just this longer section of threaded rod. Obviously, that's quickly adjusted, but outside of that, what you see is pretty good for what it is. On the bottom portion of the hull, we just have some generic Sherman details. We have the rigidity hull ribs going across. We are missing the escape hatch, which is generally located in this area over here. And we are also missing just some other small bits of detailing, like drainage plugs and the row of fasteners that hold the transmission cover in place. Oop, that's the interrupter gear. That's okay. That's a feature. The other thing we'll see, we have a bunch of exposed fasteners on the bottom. Again, it's perfectly fine for what it is, and we have the Mato logo right there, front and center. While upside down, we have the transmission cover, and the transmission cover does have some good things going for it. First, the geometry is excellent, so that's a good thing. It has the toe points integrally built in. That's nice too. We have some cast and foundry markings right here, also excellent. It's missing, though, some other small little fittings like the drainage plugs and those other little blisters found on the bottom of the hull. It's also nice and smooth, which is good and bad. It's good quality. That's a good casting. But on the real ones, it actually would have some texture on this. Obviously, that's something I could address with my finger in about 5 minutes. And anyone who knows my videos, you know what I'm talking about. And get your head out of the gutter. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm talking about adding the stepling with my finger. Anyway, back to the other thing that I always notice about the transmission cover is that they have these big cap screws over here that are, in my opinion, obtrusive, and they kind of hurt the look. But fortunately, these are easily swapped out with a set of dome-headed fasteners, which blend in much better compared to the cap screw counterparts. But again, that remains to be a thing I have to do on this build. Back to the rear. The rear also has the same mistake that we see on every single RTR 1/16 scale Sherman or M4A3 pattern vehicle on the market, and that is the extenders are missing on this section over here. And also what's missing that would be found on the M36 specifically is the flip grill. Remember, this is based on the M4A3, and M4A3s do have that flip grill found in this area over here, and that would be something that would be present on this vehicle as well. Fortunately, I have the parts to rectify that, and again, as the video goes on, you'll see exactly how I go ahead and do that. Moving our way to the suspension, like I mentioned before, the suspension is actually one of the model's high points. It's excellent where the materials that were used to render it out, and the details are pretty good too. The idler is interesting in that this actually has a reinforced idler that I've seen on only one example of an M10 tank destroyer. They did exist, but they're very rare, and it's kind of weird that of all of the patterns of idlers that they chose to go with, they went with this one, which is, again, an interesting choice. But either way, hey, you have it. It is a two-piece assembly, so you have the seam over here. This is generally something that I take care of with a little bit of body work, but again, more information on that is to come. On the remainder of the VVS housings, they are pretty much standard. So you got the standard type of details. You're also missing the standard type of detail fittings. As the video goes on, of course, we will be taking care of that. Probably, if I was to say a shortcoming found on the VVS is the exposed spring over here. As you can see, it's just a standard coil spring, while on the real Sherman it would, of course, be a volute spring. But with the type of functionality this piece has, there's nothing really you can do about that. So this is just one of those things you just have to live with, specifically on a Mato. To be fair, I believe Henlong and Tegan have the same thing, but that is something definitely to keep in mind. While on the suspension, takes us to the main row wheels, and the row wheels are decently engineered. They have some nice features on them. One feature that I personally like is the rubber tire, how it is a separate piece of equipment compared to just having everything integrally molded like we see on the Henlong examples. This is much similar to what we see on the Tagen variants of the M4 Sherman family. Although the rubber tire on the Matos tend to be a bit thicker compared to the ones on the Tagen, which in my opinion, the Tagen ones are a little bit more true to scale, but either way, the Mato road wheels, again, will do the job just fine. I do like real rubber tires found on these models. The other thing that I like about the road wheels is I like the bearing or bushing system that they have. Most companies, I believe, use a bushing. However, these ones are, from what I can tell, bearings. I will be able to tell in more depth once I dig into the project, but from the performance, I'm guessing ball bearings. Because these things, once they get moving, they really don't stop, which transfers over into just better performance when the tank is in operation. This now brings us to the drive sprockets, and the drive sprockets here are the standard Mato VVSS drive sprockets that we see on all of their Sherman-based vehicles, and are also the ones found on the aftermarket scene. And they're good. The quality on them are excellent. It's that same die cast that we see on the other components as well as the main material that the things are made in, so they're pretty durable for what they are, and they have some good detailing on the surface. We have here what depicts an early open spoke version of the VVSS sprocket, which is more than acceptable for an M36 tank destroyer. The sprocket also has a nice little detail face over here that conceals the inner locking fastener that secures this to the drive shaft on the gearbox, which again is something that we commonly see, but the Mato does a good job with it regardless. The only ding, though, that is found in this location is the absence of that little center divot, which would be found on the inner portion here of that little circle found on the sprocket. If anyone have seen my recently uploaded M4A3E2 Jumbo video, I go ahead and mention more information about the divot and why it's important, but needless to say, it's something that is absent on the Mato, but it's one that fortunately is easily added, specifically if you have a lathe. But more information on that, of course, is to come. The other thing that is a ding on the Mato sprocket is the shape of the center stem or column here of the sprocket. On the Mato, it has a hourglass type shape to it. However, on the real Sherman sprocket, it's just a cylindrical tube. As for why they went with this design, your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it was for strength and rigidity, or possibly just ease of manufacture. Either way, it is a ding on the piece, but fortunately, it's in a really, really obscure location, specifically in the scale, and you're not going to notice it at all. And again, it's one of those things that you just basically live with. Moving to the rear detail, starts with the Pioneer tools. These are the stock ones, of course. As you can see, they have been pre-painted by Mato. Generally, these are just found integrally glued to the surface, and I always have to pry them off. And more than likely, I'm still going to have to do that with this one over here. As for the quality of the tools, they're okay at best. In my opinion, the Henlong ones are better detailed compared to the Mato counterparts. Will these be recycled or not? That remains to be seen, but is a data point I did want to mention. We do have a nice little row of detail fasteners up here, and we do have the rear lifting hooks found in these sections, but these again appear to be the same ones found on the front, just recycled on the back, which on a real M10 or an M36 is incorrect. These were their own things, and this is something that I may also be addressing. But again, we'll see as the video continues. Also on the rear portion, we have the brush-guarded rear taillights. The brush guards are really good. They look the job and do the job quite well. And the taillights are okay. They have the right rear portion to them. It's just this face portion that they do fall short. They try to emulate the cat's eye detailing right over here. In the past, I would get these 3D printed headlight or taillight covers from Shapeways. Sadly, they don't exist anymore, so this is something I'm gonna have to try to source myself. Fortunately, I do have proper cat's eye lenses in 1/6 scale, so I just gotta go ahead and shrink them down and see if I could go ahead and get them to print with the same details in the smaller scale. But again, that's something that remains to be seen. Either way, what you see here is indeed what you get. The taillights and the headlights, of course, are functional. When you turn the tank on, they blink, as they do in what's customarily seen on all the other RTRs that are on the market. Moving towards the side takes us to more iconic bits of detailing for this family of vehicle. We have here the bottom fender section, which looks excellent. Even has that little seam line right over here, which would be found on the real unit, so that's a plus. The other thing that it has, again, is one more iconic bit of detailing for this parent vehicle, and those are the applicant armor mounts that we have here on the side and also on the front. The model is very nice because the way they're rendered out is with little metal fasteners and little washers that are found in these areas over here. Again, very nicely rendered, and that was a very nice touch done by Mato. What is absent on the sides are the grouser racks, which would be located in these areas over here along with the grousers. We do have the spare track racks found in this section over here. This would be present on this vehicle. However, the track racks are just the standard Mato ones, which are metal. They're semi-functional where you could slide track links in, but they're very basic in their overall shape and appearance, and this is something that may be subject to change. Right in front of it, we have a first aid kit. This here is resembling the first aid kit that we see on the M26 Pershing from Henlong, only it's just done in metal, and I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they did. What's interesting to point out is that the same exact fittings are done on the opposite side. In real life, you only have one of these units in place, and the other one is redundant. Also over here we have the antenna well. Again, another iconic bit of detailing found on this family of vehicle, and it has a standard stub right there, and this same little stub is what we see on all of these models from Henlong to Tegan, and of course Mato is no different. That, needless to say, is going to be yanked out and an ECA MP48 will be dropped in place. Front portion detailing looks good. Again, I love the fasteners for the applicant armor sections. That's excellent. The transmission cover also looks pretty good too. And the headlights and brush guards are, again, perfectly adequate for this model. The front tin work is also very nicely done in that it has the right geometry to it, but they also made them fully functional. Very nice fitting and feature indeed. And the pieces are nicely engineered in that regard. Moving topside takes to the bow hatches. These are perfect for an M10 or an M36. They have the correct geometry to them. They have the correct fittings with the periscope. They are functional in that they open up, and they open up in the correct way where they open outward and over. Nothing much can be improved on that. We also have some hatchwell details right over here. Again, this would be true to form to the real vehicle. The periscopes are depicted in the open state, however, there is no prism found on the inside, and there are no brush guards found on these locations over here. In addition to these two, there's another backup periscope right here on the side section of the driver's compartment, and it's the same detailing as we see on the bow areas. Flipping it over takes us to the rear section, and again we have what would be an M10A1, or in this case an M36 pattern of engine deck, where we have the GAA type engine hatches that open up. The engine hatches themselves are very true to form to the real one, where unlike the Sherman where it has a big duct that comes down, those would not be found on the M36. The fuel filler caps are in the correct locations. We also have the fire extinguisher in this little box that we have here. And again, the only thing that just makes it an M10A1 really is the travel lock. You pitch that and you now have an M36. I also like how the rear engine hatch area is a separate part. That's actually very good, because if you are trying to build this as an M10 and you want it retrofitted with the correct M4A2 type engine hatch, that can be done. You just go ahead and either fabricate or 3D print a new rear section and just drop it into this section over here. Voila, transforming your M10A1 into just a standard M10. But again, that's food for thought, or potentially an idea for a future project. Moving upward even further brings us to the turret, and the turret on the model is actually very nicely done. So it first has the right geometry to it. That's a huge plus. I like how they rendered out the little handles, the little footman loops and tie downs, which are an iconic bit of detailing on the 36, have been rendered out very nicely, and they are literally just little bent pieces of metal into pre-drilled holes found on the side. As you can see, they have depth to them. They're not just molded little strips like we see on the 135s. And they do the job again quite nicely. The top grab rail here is another bit of detailing that's known on this family of vehicle. This is okay. If we take a look at it, you can see it looks very, very fabricated, where it's just bent pieces of wire and they're just crimped around this section over here. Does it do the job? Yes. Is it something that could be improved? Possibly. But it is, again, just a data point I want to reference. On the front portion here, we do have some nice fittings here for the mantlet mount. We have the integrally molded fasteners, which look good, and we have the tarpaulin mount that's present as well, and the tarpaulin mount is segmented. Again, that's actually a nice detail. The mantlet does have the correct geometry to it. where it has the hole here for the optic. The geometry, again, is excellent. You could use a little cast texturing, and then basically you're off to the races. The pivot mount is pretty good. There is the large cylindrical section over here, but there is an exposed fastener that would not be seen on the real unit. On the 90mm barrel, correct geometry right here. It's a turn CNC component. It does not, this is rendering the version without the muzzle brake. It has the thread protector on, and outward appearance, the piece, again, looks pretty good for what it is. On the rear portion, again, we have that nice geometry here for an M36, and now we have some rear details. So the first is a 50 cal storage pintle mount. This is the same one we see on the Sherman, or looks like the one on the Mato Sherman. It remains to be seen if I'm going to use that or not. We also have what popped off, a receiver rack, which plugs into this area right here, like so, and giving you the complete look. I will give, again, credit to Mato. They did render it out nicely. We do have some mounts over here for some bits of equipment. I think it's for the tripod for the M2, if I'm not mistaken. And on the top portion here, this is something they did excellent, really, really excellent, is the rear bustle. First, they have the 50 cal barrel sections, and what's unique about an M36, it did not have the provisions for mounting on one barrel for the M2, but two. So we have two of them right here with the rabbit ears, and everything is all present. The geometry on the pieces look fantastic. Literally, I'm not going to do squat to this area over here. This is quite perfect. We also have here a travel lock that's functional. Travel lock is okay. I'm on the fence if I'm going to keep it or not, but the stock one is good for what it is. But the best part is really the fasteners that we have here and the strap for the tarpaulin right there. These fasteners are found on the back portion here of the 36 because these are the locations for the ammo racks, and they're bolted from the top. And of course, you would find that detailing on the real vehicle, and bravo to Mato, they did a good job rendering that. As for the opposite side, it's literally just a mirror image, so nothing much to go over there. This brings us to the roof, and this is the biggest problem with rendering an M36 or an M10 Jackson, specifically if you're going to make it radio controlled. Because these vehicles are open top, and because they're open top, you can't really have the RC gizmos on the inside where they're tucked away out of sight. But they went ahead and did something clever, which is the armored roof. This was a field modification that was made to a lot of these tank destroyers in field. Thus the term field modification. But anyway, this was a good way to have your cake and eat it too. You got the cool M36 Jackson, and you do have all of the machinery, and it's concealed with these sections. The pieces looks like it's made out of thin sheet metal, again representing the real one very nicely, and they are all hinged. So you just flip these guys out of the way, or you can take the whole piece off like I just did right here. While I'm back on the upper roof section, you can see they're all hinged, and the quality materials are excellent. There would be no periscopes on the inside. These are just vision slits. Again, these things were made in the rear area. But again, nicely detailed either way. It's also nice that they didn't go ahead and integrally mold this into the turret in case for whatever reason you want to go ahead and scratch build an interior on your own. You're not handcuffed with that section in place. So bravo in that regard. With the top off, you get to look at the internal section, and there is some internal detailing. We have the breech, we have the breech block, the armored guards on either side, and we do have ammo racks right there on the back. Very basic detailing indeed, but again, you're not going to exactly have that nice detailing of the seats, the benches, all that good stuff, because the thing does have to work at the end of the day. This unit here does have a servo actuated elevation, and it also has a recoil system with a flash, and that again is all done controlled with the servo, so that's why we're just going to roll with it in the covered format on this model. But again, for data point purposes, there you go, there's your interior detailing. We also have here a very simplistic Browning M2HB. It's the same one we saw on the Sherman. On the last one, I didn't utilize this because I swapped it out for a 3D printed unit from Shapeways. But as we know, we can't have nice things in this world. Shapeways is gone, sadly, or the old Shapeways is gone. And so I may have to go ahead and either work with this one or come up with some other solution for a Browning if the customer wants to progress to that point. As for the pintle mount, it is again, the piece is just built into the 50 like this. and it can pivot around very well. It does have the detailing of the hinge mechanism, but it's one of the weaker aspects, in my opinion, on the piece. But that's what they got, or I should say, that's what they give you. And that's all there is to the exterior, which means it's now time to, you guessed it,
hey, pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
Pop the hood.
And to do that, that's done the same way as on the M4A3, and that's done via the engine hatch grates that we have right here. You simply just flip these guys open, and you have this big thumb screw located right here on the back. You also have, by the way, this is the entry point into the vehicle. You can charge the model right from here with its lithium-ion battery. Or it's a LiPo, I think. It's a 3-pronger, so it's probably a LiPo. You also have your power switch right there. As you see, it jittered to life. But to take the tank apart, we just have this big knob right over here. You undo that. And now the whole upper can just slide right off. Like so. With the camera readjusted, you get a better look at the interior guts of the model. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the Mato tanks utilize a Clark board. And the Clark board is something that a lot of people love. That's their go-to RC system, and they praise it up and down. Me, personally, I like to go against the grain on this one, and I'm probably going to fetch some heat, but this is, again, my channel, and you come here for my opinions. And from what I've seen on the Clarks, they're okay at best. For instance, if I have a Mato, I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to mess with it, but I'm not going to run out and grab one and swap out the stock equipment, say on a Taken or a along with the Clark. People are going to crucify me for that one, but honestly, I don't care. I really just don't see the magic behind it. If anything, it makes the controls much more convoluted to drive compared to the others, but if you just want to keep the thing stock, yeah, the Clark board will work just fine for that. We have a speaker built into the system over here, and this one does have a smoke system. So I was wrong when I mentioned before. The Sherman that I built did not have one, but this one does, which is good. I will modify the exhaust to be hollow, but that is something that remains to be seen. And we also have here the gearbox. The gearbox is the Mato steel gearbox, and these are excellent. There's no problem with the gearboxes. They work very well. We do have a battery pack right over here that's strapped in place. It appears to be a LiPo battery. I'm not going to mess with it. It's fine where it is. But what you see is basically, again, what you get. On the bottom portion here, hang on, let me readjust the turret. Moving to the top side, we get to see the umbilical cord plug, as well as the turret rotation mechanism. This does have a 360 rotating turret. The rotating gear is plastic. That is something that some people actually want to know and care about. They do have metal ones out there, so if you want to replace that with a metal one, you could go ahead and do so. As I mentioned before, the recoil and elevation servo controlled, and we do have a slip ring right over here, so the wires don't bind on you during operation. And you can see the wires for the LEDs that I mentioned before. That's really all there is to it for the model itself. Let me go ahead and get this guy back together again. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention are the tracks. The tracks on this model here are, again, the Mato VVSS Sherman die-cast tracks. These ones are representing the chevron pattern. And when it comes to these tracks, Mato has about like 4 or 5 different options available, from the rubber chevron to the steel chevron to the steel cleat. There are lots of options available, and they also have them with and without duckbills. Now, on that note, if you're a guy that loves duckbills, you're not going to want an M10 or an M36 because of that armored section that we have here. Obviously, the duckbills are going to be a problem. They're going to get in the way. You're not even going to be able to install it onto the hull. So if you're a guy that digs your duckbills, you are going to have to do some hot rodding to the section over here where you cut them away, which was something that was done, by the way, in real life. If you see pictures of these things that were duckbill fitted, this little fender here was chopped in a way to allow that to happen. So if you're a duckbill guy, that is a modification you are going to have to make. But if you don't want to make any modifications, then just roll with it in this format and basically call it a day. As for the tracks, again, these are my favorite RC Sherman tracks on the market. They are very nicely rendered out. I like the black oxide coating on them. That's perfect. A lot of times I don't even need to paint them. The tracks are properly designed where it's like the real one where you have 2 separate pads and the 2 separate end connectors. On Henlong, for instance, they're metal upgraded ones, which are awful, I might add. They're junk. And even the Tegan ones aren't that great either, because they do the same problem or the same mistake where the link has the end connectors integrally molded on, and it doesn't really work all that well. The Mato ones, in my opinion, are by far the best. So, which is why they're my go-to. Whenever I'm doing either a Tegan or a Henlong Sherman, first thing I do, I buy a set of replacement tracks and sprockets from Mato. And if you are replacing your tracks, you have to replace the sprocket too, because the timing on the 3 are not interchangeable. One last thing I want to mention is the radio. So for this one here, it came stock with a Fly Sky. I'm not sure if he did this, the customer, or if it came like this. But either way, this is the radio that controls this model over here. Let's see if I can go ahead and get this thing running. So I first turn on the radio. I'm going to turn the tank on. And you can see the elevation works really good. Turret rotates very, very smoothly. I gotta start the engine. Let's see. Alright, that's headlights. This one has single stick drive, which is great. Makes it much easier to drive compared to the Sherman that I built a little while ago. And that kills it. Obviously, in part 3 of this video series, this thing is going to be taken for a thorough test drive where you have to see all the little functions and gizmos in full effect. Or at least if I do my job correctly. But anyway, that's what we have there. Turn this bad boy off. Let me turn off the tank first. There we go. And now, I can turn this guy off. Alright, so with all that out of the way, next stop, take this guy to the shop and start the teardown and rebuild. With the model back in the shop, it's time to do the teardown. The upper hull has been removed completely from the lower, and this is only held on in place electronically with a few connectors. However, this can be confusing because the connectors, some of them are identical to one another, and there are no real set pat on how they get installed. So you have to know which plug goes where. Fortunately, one trick that I do is that with a paintbrush, you can see that I go ahead and I paint the connectors different colors. There's a corresponding unit, or I should say the corresponding jack is painted with the exact same color, so at the tail end of the build, it's just simply match the colors and the piece just plugs in accordingly. This was also done, it's done to these two ones here. This one's red. This one over here is yellow, and then these two 3-pinners over here, you'll see that one of them is orange, and the other one is a brown color. Again, corresponding colors were painted on the top side. This is something I definitely recommend, specifically if you are working on one of these things. A lot of times they're pretty daunting with all the plugs and stuff, and lately these things are getting way more complex every single year with the new fittings and gizmos that the companies are coming out with. So I definitely recommend doing this just to prevent any sort of issues with the wrong plug getting plugged into the wrong socket. With the upper removed from the lower, it's now time to start the actual rebuild. To do that, I need to take off the track. And to take off the track, I got to take off the sprocket. And to take off the sprocket, I got to take off the center hub. It's funny how that works with a chain of event type situation, but either way, this is what we have to do. The hub here is just threaded on. There's no Loctite or any sort of adhesive whatsoever. So you just take your thumb, you put in the center portion here, and you just simply twist. After a few turns, the piece pops right off, and there goes your center fastener right there that secures the sprocket in place. On this example over here, it appears to use a Phillips type bolt. On some other examples that I've built in the past, they were Allen fasteners. So it looks like it's just at the luck of the draw on what type of fastener that you get. Either way, if you have the tool, it comes off without any sort of problems. There goes the bolt. Be sure not to lose this. What I like to do is I like to have a little Ziploc bag on hand, and I put all of the fasteners and other sorts of bit of equipment in there because it really makes the chances of losing or misplacing the part greatly reduced and limited. Well, as it turns out, you need to do a little bit more than just remove the sprocket ring in order to take the track off. And that involves actually breaking the track. This is because with the design of the Sherman sprockets here on the Mato with that skid rail, they do a phenomenal job in keeping the track in place, and you can't exactly just slip it out sideways. So the only way to slip it out is you have to pop it like this, and then you can go ahead and just peel the track off accordingly. Which in a way is actually a good thing because it keeps the track in place and it prevents it from throwing, which is basically the intent of that piece. On the track itself, the Mato tracks are actually held on very, very well with the way everything is crimped together. So it is going to take a slight bit of force in order to get the pieces removed. However, this can be done with basically just 2 pliers. You clink it on either end of the guide tooth over here, you wiggle it, and then the piece will just work itself loose. To take off the other track, I'll go ahead and walk you through it. Here I have a pair of vice grips, as well as a broadhead plier. And I'm basically going to clink the vice grip onto the end connector. Now, it's tightened to a point where it's on there nice and secure, but it's not too tight where it can break the part. This is only die cast, so you do have to be careful with it to a certain extent. Once the piece is clinked on, I go on the opposite side with the other plier, get a good grip of it, and just wiggle it until finally the piece will, hopefully, work itself loose. Like so. Set that aside. Peel this guy off. And there we have it. Obviously, these guys here are going in the bag because they are most certainly being recycled when the thing gets put back together again. Alright, and as you can see from these tracks, this thing has been driven, so the guy did take this thing out for a spin or two on some rough terrain, or at least on some dirt terrain, I should say. Good for him. The tracks are going to be cleaned off towards the latter half of the assembly, but again, more information on that is to come. At this point here, the tracks are going to get snailed up, and I'm going to put them in the parts bucket, which is what I always do whenever I'm working on one of these 116s. I have a nice little bucket on hand, and I use that to contain the parts nice and neatly while the build is progressing. The next thing I went in and did was I took off the transmission cover. You can see the piece right here in my hand. The transmission cover is held in place, as we saw before, via some fasteners. We have those 2 cap screws on the bottom, and we have 4 Phillips screws right here on the top. The reason why I took it off at this time is because it makes it a bit easier for me to go ahead and add the cast texturing, which is something that's going to be added actually quite soon. If you want to know what the hull looks like without the cover in place, well, there you have it. Something else I also want to mention at this time is that the return rollers are ball bearing equipped, which is a very nice feature. And one other thing I want to make an addendum to what I mentioned earlier, where the roll wheels are removable, and they are not. In order to take the roll wheels off, you actually have to disassemble the entire VVSS housing, which is not something I'm going to be doing. So I'm just going to be working around everything here and just painting accordingly. One thing that I do recall from the other Sherman now, come to think of it, was that I did overpaint all of the row wheels. However, with the rubber material that these things are made of, paint chips off ridiculously easy. So this is one of those things where you just paint it all in one piece, and then you could just go after the fact and just scrape off the paint, leaving for the natural rubber color to be revealed underneath. Jumping forward a little bit brings to the point right here where the rear hull sections have been revised, and at this point here, the details are being remounted. So originally, the molded in details were amputated, as I mentioned before, and now you get to see what it looks like with the piece flattened off. This was probably the most labor-intensive part while doing a conversion like this. Because of the material that the thing is made in being solid die cast, it does take a little bit of wear and tear on the Dremel bit in order to, and the Dremel itself by extension, in order to remove these sections, but they have to be amputated out in order to prepare the surface for the new parts. But it's one of those type of procedures that after it's completed, it does immensely look better compared to the stock option. Once the pieces were blended away, I went ahead then and started fabrication of the extender. For the extenders here, these are the ECA 1/16 scale M4A3 extenders, and although these are not made to drop into the Mato vehicle over here, they can still be adapted so that they can work with the model. This piece here was kept stock, and then the two side extensions here were heavily cut to the way we see it here to, again, work with the lower hull, but also more importantly, the upper hull. With these extensions fitted in place, it definitely improves the rear section here immensely, and it also gives you the location to mount on the flip grill, which is something that is going to be mounted on shortly after the filming of this scene. Once this was complete, I went ahead and added the sculpted weld beads into the various locations. This is done for detailing, and also it helps covers up any sort of the seams on the section itself. The welds go all throughout the spots and areas, again, just to give it some extra detailing. With the piece flipped over, you get to see the inner portion here and how everything was fitted in place. Obviously, I use a lot of angle strip here to act as a brace to hold everything with more surface area, which allows the glues a better, more stronger location to bond and grab onto the model itself. On the bottom section, it was slightly too short, so I went ahead and added a little piece of Plastruct square stock to each section here, thus filling in the gap and giving me the appropriate width here. I don't remember having to do this modification on the M4A3, but for some reason here it just turned out better this way, which is more important why the weld beads were sculpted, because it just covers up these sections here completely and it looks seamless. On the ECA sets, they do come with the angle strips for this exact same purpose, regardless of you're mounting onto a Henlong or a Mato or even a Taken. These setups here are definitely helpful to have on hand as opposed to just trying to glue everything without the braces in place. Of course, on the bottom section here, you can see the three fasteners in this area. On the real unit, these three fasteners here are used to hold up the radiators, so again, that detailing would be present. And on this area here, once the welds were done, it was then time to mount on the rear details. You can see the replacement ECA M4A3 rear engine hatch right over here. This just gets glued on directly to the location. Unlike the original one, this one is static. However, as I mentioned before, the functionality of the kit one is a bit dubious because it's functional, but it's functional in the wrong places. So it's best to just amputate it out and just replace it with the static one. This will look much better after the piece is painted and weathered. And this brings us to the exhaust manifolds. So here we have the ECA M4A3 exhaust manifolds. However, these have been modified compared to the stock units that I generally install on these models. These units here have been hollowed out because, as we saw before, this unit does have a smoke system fitted, and so the solid rest ones were definitely not going to be adequate for this application. To do the conversion, this is ironically the exact same method that I use on my 1/6 scale counterparts, where I take the ECA 1/6 scale exhaust, cut them open, hollow them out, and reassemble them. And now, huzzah, they are hollow for RC use. And this one here basically followed the exact same type of format. I went ahead, cut the heads off. I drilled out all the sections. For the open area over here, I went ahead and used a Dremel with a small router bit, and I was able to carefully hog out the material, hollowing it out to this type of a format. And once it was done, I was able to add the faux fasteners, which R-Kit supplied on the static ones. And I also installed a plastic tube in this section over here to connect to the plumbing found on the smoke system. The other unit, the exact same thing was also utilized. However, I kind of had a blowout here when I was hogging out the material, but this is something, just a little swipe of putty is more than adequate at plugging up and filling in. Once, or I should say after some little sanding here or there, I'm going to go ahead and mount these pieces in place. And as you see, they just drop into the model on the kit locations basically flawlessly. Once these things are fitted in place, that's a big step out of the way, and you can already see how much more improved the back is with these new details fitted. Once these components are out of the way, the next thing to focus on is the mounting of the deflector grill, which is something I'm going to turn around and install. Fast forwarding a little bit further brings us to the point right here where a large majority of the external details have already been completed, and the model is basically almost ready for painting. I'd say it's about 80% there, so we're really, really close. There still are a few more smaller fittings that remain to be added, but rest assured, as the project continues, they will be fitted in place. Starting with the upper hull, the first thing I want to mention is the addition of the weld beads. The model does not have any sort of weld beads found on the appropriate locations where the hull sections would intersect, so these here were just simply sculpted on in my usual manner. They were done on the front glacis plate over here, the small little section here on the top that's found between the two hatches, as well as also the top deck and the rear section. Obviously, where the engine deck is, you don't continue with the weld bead, and it stops right there where the rear engine deck plate would be removable. Shifting the camera downward brings us to the side hull over here, and here you get to see a bunch of new detail accessories that have been fitted. Several of these items are brand new items listed on the EastCoastArmory.com catalog and were the subject matter of a new product announcement video that was posted shortly prior to the events in this video over here. So, starting with the rear section, moving our way to the front, takes us to the grouser rack. These racks themselves are of course 3D printed, and they are intended for use and designed for use on the Mato pattern of M10 or M36 Jackson. The components are offered on the ECA catalog in a couple configurations, where we have just a naked set here, or you can also purchase it with the grousers that get fitted in place. I do have the grousers. They are going to be mounted, but this is going to be done after the model is fully painted and weathered. In order to secure these components in place, you will need to recycle the stock mounted mounting boss fasteners. These are real metal fasteners and are just threaded into the body section, and to thread them out, you are either going to have a small little micro wrench in order to do so, or you could just use a giant pair of pliers and basically twist them loose, and then finally could use your fingers to undo the rest. I actually did the latter. In order to secure the racks in place, they're not exactly a drop-in install. The holes are really close, but they do require some slight hand fitting by the builder in order to go ahead and fudge them so that they could fit appropriately. It's one of those things that I always found in CAD to be easier said than done, where you have a model and trying to make something fit on a specific section. There's always going to be some slight hand fitting required. It's one of those things that it's easier said than done in terms of design. And even though you take the appropriate measurements, which is exactly what I did, you always seem to be off by like a little bit of a fraction here or there. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the material is just simply removed with a little bit of filing with a needle file, or possibly even a Dremel with a micro router bit, and then once the material is removed, the piece can then fit in place. For the washers, these are the kit supplied ones. However, for the ones over here and here, you are going to have to make a modification where you slice off a portion of the washer itself, otherwise it won't fit properly onto the mount. You'll notice that the racks have been primed prior to installation. This was done to ensure that all surfaces are thoroughly painted. Because the racks are standing off from the hull because of the standoffs, this is very relevant because you don't want to have missed areas of paint found on the rear sections. Moving forward takes us to the spare track racks. These were originally found on the model, but they're your standard Mato ones, which are extremely ludicrously basic in their overall detailing, and in my opinion are something that do hurt the overall look of the model. They are durable, I will give them that, but they are something that does leave a lot of room for improvement. The ones that we have here from EastCoastArmory.com, they are a HD 3D printed component, and you get to see what they look like when first installed. These pieces are functional in that you can slide the track links in place, but once fit in place, you could then mount the strap detailing on, which will then complete the look. Of course, these will be fleshed out and completed after the model's fully painted and weathered. The spare track rack is found on both sides of the model, and it's a mirror image, which you will see once I flip the model over. Continuing forward brings us to the foul weather driving hood rack. The rack, as I mentioned in the other video, is another new accessory to the ECA catalog, and on the M10 family, and by extension the M36, is a very important bit of detailing. I already went over the features and the geometry of this component in the previous video, but here you get to see it fitted in place. Also, it's important to note, even though the set contains 2 of these units, only 1 is needed for an M10 or an M36 tank destroyer. Moving to the bow hatches, you get to see what they look like with their new ECA US AFV periscopes fitted in place. The periscopes were another new accessory that were mentioned in a previous video, but again, here's what they look like being fitted onto an actual model. On an M10, or in this case again an M36 Jackson, there are 3 periscopes found on the hull. 1 on each of the bow hatches, and the third one is an auxiliary periscope located here in the corner. The one in the corner does not have a brush guard fitted in place, or it tends never to have a brush guard in place, and because of that, the integrally printed on brush guard had to have been amputated, and this was done with a pair of clean cut snips, which was funny because I went to great lengths to design the parts with the periscopes integrally printed on, but this is the one time where I didn't have to have it, so I went ahead and simply removed it. I'm actually going to more than likely tool up a set or an addendum to the periscopes that have another group of them without the brush guards, in case again you have a situation like this one here. On the periscopes, the ones on the hatches are rendered in the open position, while the one here on the corner is rendered in the closed position. But of course, this is up to the discretion of the builder, and you could switch these around any way you wish. Because on the periscope sets, there are two options available, open and closed, and when I do the brush guardless ones, I'm going to do the exact same thing. The periscopes are extremely detailed and are far superior compared to the detailing found on the stock ones, which I have right over here. It's just a simple plate that is actually usually just rendered in the open position. And there's no internal periscope detailing, and the periscope base detailing is just non-existent. So it's a huge upgrade, and it's really going to look great once everything is full in its final form and it's painted and weathered. While on the front hull section takes to the brush guards, and I went ahead and added those little canisters, which would be found on the brush guards on the Sherman family of vehicles. As I always mention in these videos, and I'm probably going to mention it again in the next installment, the purpose of this canister is to house a chain retained plunger that's used to plug up the hole of the headlight when not in use. Well, even though the plunger sections are missing, and that is something that does happen in the field, the canisters would still be remaining. As for the canisters, these are fabricated out of lengths of shrink tubing. I just simply cut them to shape and glue them to the sides here of the brush guards themselves. It's a quick, easy bit of detailing. It's one that doesn't take much work, but also improves the model quite a bit. Switching over to the opposite side of the model takes us to the other side detailing and has already been fitted at this time. This would include the mirror image items that were discussed previously on the opposite side, such as the grouser rack, as well as the spare track rack. But what makes this side of the vehicle a little bit different and more interesting is with the detailing that we have right over here. This is the position where the hull-mounted antenna base would be fitted. And on the Mato M10 series of vehicles, the location is nicely done, where it's got the correct geometry, and they did a nice job with having it embedded into the side of the armor, as it would be on the real one. The only addition that I made is just the addition of the sculpted weld beads in these locations over here, as this would be seen on the real vehicle. As for the antenna itself, I am going to be, of course, replacing it with an ECA MP48. I have that antenna ready to go. It's off camera, but that's something that I always add at the tail end of the build just before final assembly. The original antenna would have been this object right over here, which is just a CNC brass lug, and this is just held in place purely with friction. There's no fasteners or anything to worry about. If you want to remove one of these, it's very simply done. Just brute force it with a pair of pliers. Just go in there, grab onto it, twist it a bit until finally you can just yank the thing right out. As you can see, there's no fasteners or any other types of equipment that are keeping this thing in place to worry about. Just go in there and rip it out the old-fashioned way. As for the hole, no need to worry about that because that's the exact same size hole that's on the ECA antenna base, so it's just going to be a drop-in install. The next bit of equipment is this one right over here, which is the first aid kit, or I should say it's the first aid kit holder. Another very iconic bit of detailing for the M10/36 family of vehicles, and this is the kit one. The kit supply one is perfectly suffice. There's no need to reinvent the wheel on that one, and I just simply remounted it to the location that it was found originally on the kit. Although one thing you need to be aware of is that on these antenna base, on these first aid kit boxes, they open laterally as opposed to vertically. From all the examples of M10s and 36s that I've seen, they tend to be in this format. Fortunately, the only thing you have to do is just mount it in the position that you see here. In order to secure these in place, these are held in place with a single fastener, and actually I have the other one here. Here goes the box, and there goes the fastener, and the piece just basically just threads on. So a little drop of glue or Loctite is really all that you need. You lock the piece in place and just basically thread it in, bottoming it out, and you'll be good to go. On the kit, like I mentioned before, there are 2 of these that are supplied. However, there's only 1 found on these vehicles, so you are going to have a odd man out. And if you do not worry, you're actually doing things correctly. The next bit of detailing actually brings us downward, and that is towards the armor side skirt sections. So one of the coolest aspects on this pattern of vehicle has this built-in side skirt. Now normally I'm not a side skirt guy, specifically on my Sherman pattern of vehicles. However, the M10 and M36 are the exception to that. It just really gives it that really cool iconic look. And the one thing that I did though was that first, as I mentioned before, the bottom piece and the top piece are 2 separate components and they are held on with fasteners. What I went ahead and did was I first added a drop of red Loctite to each of the fasteners, tightening them down in place, preventing them from ever getting loose. Once that was done, I injected some super glue into the seams over here where the two components meet up, solidifying it again, just making it all that much more robust. Once that was done, I actually did a little swipe of red putty on the leading edge to polish down any sort of seams that are remaining. And this was all in preparation of the very last thing that was added, was this little strip here of sheet styrene. The styrene strip here replicates the mounting strip which would be found on the real vehicle. And it's not really a mounting strip, it's like an overhang. It's really weird if you've ever seen one of these. But there is this ledge here, or this lip here found on all of the M10 tank or M10 series of vehicles, and it runs from the sides and it also runs on the back that I'll get to in a moment. To simulate this on the model is very easily done. Just a strip of evergreen styrene strip was all that was needed. This, I believe, is an 1/8 of an inch wide section of strip, and you just simply add the glue and drop it down in place. For the front section over here, I did have to make a small little cut in order to clear the fender section that we have right there, and just a little cut in the correct locations, all that's required to have the piece fit on appropriately. Once the styrene was added, a swipe of red putty was applied to the leading edge here, polished down with some wet sanding, leaving for the final end result. This was done, needless to say, to both sides. I have to be very careful because the hull's not mounted on at this time. It's just positioned in place. So it's moving around on me, but anyway, here you get to see what it looks like on the reverse side here, and as for the back section, you can see what it looks like right here on the rear location. For the back one, I did have to make a slight little cut here to where the axe is, just in order to clear the axe. The axe I'm not going to rip off or remove off the model, so I just simply worked around it by adding the little notch here where the axe head would be. Also, with this camera angle, you get to see the addition of the ECA M4A3 deflector grille. And with this component fitted, it completes the detailing found here on the rear section. In order to get the deflector grille to fit in places did require a bit of clever hand fitting and amputation onto the grille itself in order to adjust it to fit in the very tight confines that are back here on this section of vehicle. Unlike a standard M4A3, where you actually have quite a bit of real estate back there to work with an M36, that's not necessarily the case because of with the way the hull is with these weird angles. It cuts into this section immensely, and it really does cut down on the free available real estate. However, with some very clever snips here and there, I was able to get the piece to fit, and it still works exactly as it did before. The addition of these details in the back here alone really changed this build and definitely elevated and severely improved it compared to the way it was originally. And on that note, this brings us to, well, the rear idlers. So the rear idlers, as I mentioned before, are a two-piece assembly, and there is a seam found in these sections over here, so I went ahead and with a swipe of red putty applied it to this area and just polished it down. This is something that's just going to blend in with the remainder of the paintwork when the time does come. Moving upward brings us to the travel lock. The travel lock originally found on this model over here is this unit, and this is the standard M10 one, which would be accurate for an M36. M36 utilized the same exact travel lock that we see on the Sherman family of vehicles. Even though it has the 90mm, it still retained the standard Sherman travel lock. To remove the travel lock, it's actually a long stem type installation where there's a fastener on the inside, and you undo the fastener and the piece can pop out. I didn't know that at the time, so I basically just brute forced it and I snapped the piece, which has the stem right over there. Upon doing so, there's going to be a pretty substantial hole in this area, so this was something I plugged up with some body work. It's all blended in right now, and it leaves for a seamless appearance. With the new travel lock this year is the ECA 3D printed one. Again, this is just your standard Sherman travel lock. At the moment, it's fitted in place, but I do need to make some modifications to it to better adapt it for an M36. Although the M36 travel lock was the standard Sherman one, it did have some slight differences on the back area on how it locks in place on the rear engine deck. And as the video goes on, you'll see what that looks like in its final form. But from here, this is just the standard ECA unit just dropped in place. To do that, I had to temporarily move the sledgehammer, which was located in this section right here. because the area needs the clearance for the travel lock, the sledgehammer is not going to work in this location. So I went ahead and popped it off, and I moved it slightly upward, which, by the way, is true to form to the real one. You look at the back of a real M36, the sledge is located slightly higher compared to an M10. Another happy accident is with the way the stock unit is mounted in place. It's technically mounted upside down, because you can see the molded in the tool post right over there, and it would be the open spot, so it would actually be like this if it was mounted appropriately. This here is just a recycled part from their Sherman, probably, and so it sits on the top deck like this, and so you can see how that would work. But on this one over here, it's mounted like this in the upside down manner, so by moving it and rotating, which again, the orientation in this manner would be correct for an M36, it's actually a happy accident because it makes it mounted in, well, the correct way. So that's a very interesting development. So if I put that over there briefly, you can see exactly how it would look like once fitted in place. Obviously, this is going to be secured in place after the model is fully painted and weathered. One last thing topside I wanted to mention before I jump into the turret is with this little well over here. This is for the fire extinguisher box, and the unit originally had one integrally molded on, but I'm going to be replacing it with an ECA cast resin one, so the original one was amputated out. This was hogged out with the use of a Dremel with a router bit, and I just went there and basically milled the section out by hand, leaving for the end result that you see here. Now that's all squared away, I can go ahead and just drop the ECA one in and call it a day. The ECA one is going to be much better detailed compared to the original one, which had no surface detailing on it whatsoever in regards to the fire extinguisher latches that are of course found on the front portion. Those are found on the ECA ones and are important because they get painted in red, which is a very eye-catching feature found on US tanks, and if it doesn't have it, it's just something that's really lacking. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in momentarily. And this brings us to the turret. So what we have here on this side of the turret, it's totally stock. It still has the original grab handle that's found on the top leading edge, and also has all the little tie down points found on the side portions of the turret. These are extremely important details found on this pattern of vehicle. And the kit one is at best. Yeah, it's there. At least they did you a favor where they did not mold these sections in. That's a huge plus, specifically since the thing is made out of die cast. Good luck trying to grind that down and drill these out. However, the installation leaves a bit of room for improvement. Well, like I said before, this side is still left stock. However, on this side over here, you can see what it looks like with the revisions now made. So starting with the tie-down points, as I mentioned before, the tie-down points are great in that they are pre-drilled out by the company. So you know exactly where the handles and tie-downs got to go. And that's extremely important. Trying to measure them out is something that takes a bit of time. But if they're already done for you, that's really, really a huge advantage. Also, the locations on the kit ones are correct, so that's another plus that the model does have. And this is true for not just these tie downs here, but for the top leading edge itself, or rail itself. I'll go into that more in a minute. For the tie downs, the only thing I have to do is just rip them out with a plier. Fortunately, these things are just glued in place, so if you grab a nice little needle nose plier like this over here, you can just grab the original one and just yank it out with a twist or two, and it leaves for the turret now with 2 holes found in the section. Once the units are removed, with a Dremel with a small Dremel bit, I just drill out the holes, making sure there's no crud left in them, and from there I could then make and add the new handles. New handles are fabricated out of thin floor wire that I have right over here. I picked this stuff up from, I believe, Michael's or so. It's found in every craft store that's worth its salt, and it is the perfect size for these grab handles. I just go ahead and just bend them all to shape and then just mount them to the appropriate locations. Just a little drop of glue is really all that's required. And once done, they have a much more of an appropriate look to them. If we compare and contrast, the ones here on the opposite side have more of a rounded appearance to them, while on the real vehicle, they would be a more squared off type appearance, like we see right here. Also, they're a lot flatter compared to the stock counterpart. These ones are much more to scale. As for the top rail itself, this is something that also, again, leaves some room for improvement. The stock one is too large, in my opinion, overhangs too much, and also it looks like they just did it in the cheapest, most shortcut way possible. I know, amazing, China doing that, go figure. But anyway, the point still stands. The way I went ahead and fabricate this is all out of metal and it's soldered together. Now, I'm actually going to take you along on exactly how I go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rip out the original pieces. When it comes for the little connecting points here, they're literally just wire that's bent around the main handle. So again, it's a expedient way on doing it, but it's definitely not the appropriate way. Like I said before, everything is just glued in place. So a couple wiggles here and there. And it will just come right out. You are going to have to use a little bit of elbow grease on this. And this is most certainly the phrase, breaking some eggs to make an omelet. I am not recycling any of these pieces, so I'm literally just ripping them out in the most horrific way possible. Okay, so with those removed, I'm now going to go ahead and rip out the little tie downs. I was thinking before, can you salvage the tie downs by just flattening them with a plier to change the geometry on them? And the answer is no. It's just not doable. It's easier to literally just amputate and replace or yank out and replace as opposed to trying to revise. As you can see, this plier here from Harbor Freight is doing a really good work and short work of it. It gets right into the inner recesses here. And because of the long reach on it, I have plenty of leverage to go ahead and yank the part out. If you're wondering why I moved the turret, because I don't want to potentially break the track holders that are right here. That would be a bad thing to do. Systematically going through and ripping them out. If they don't come out at first, no big deal. Just go in there with a screwdriver or a needle file or something, and you could go ahead and pry them out further. The next step is to go ahead and drill out the holes to make sure, again, there's no crud or anything else on the inside. To do that, I'm utilizing a 0.6 or a number 63. The bits are the ones that I get from my usual vendor. Again, the vendor link is listed below in the video description. Give the guy some love. And I'm going to go ahead and use this to drill them out. Now you notice that the bit is actually broken. This is not an intact drill bit, and that's done by design. You are going to shred some bits doing this. So the broken one here is more than suffice for just cleaning out the sides. Remember, you're not drilling into the piece, making a new hole. You're just cleaning out the existing hole there, and this bit here is the same size as the one found on the model. Alright, so that did, again, really short work of it. You notice I did break a little bit of the bit, but it still was able to muscle through. I'm going to use some sandpaper again just to sand down just a little bit more of the surface. Going to get prepped for the next step. Also, if you notice, I'm not removing the turret from this model. You don't really have to in order to do this procedure. You can if you want, probably make it go by a little bit easier, but frankly, I don't think it's really necessary to do at this time. This may be subject to change, though. Alright, I think that's plenty good enough for now. Over here, there's a small little pink nick, so just want to go ahead and blend that in. Again, at this time, because trying to do this with the handles fit in place, much more problematic. Alright, cool. Alright, from there, now it's time to do the fun bit, which is bending lots of little metal handles. So you may be tempted to go ahead and just bend a bunch of handles at the same time, and then just cut them out and then just install them. However, that is something that's not a good idea, because believe it or not, these handles are not all uniformed in size. Some are slightly larger than others, so if you go ahead and spend your time bending them all to one size, you're going to run into issues because they're not all going to fit. So it's honestly best to just go ahead and custom make each of them for each of the locations. It may sound problematic. You may say to yourself,
Ain't nobody got time for that.
but again, the juice is most certainly worth the squeeze. So I'm going to go ahead and bend these. Now remember, you don't want to make them as long as the other ones. That was one of the problems that they had. They stuck out too much. So I'm going to go ahead and go a bit shorter. I would love to give dimensions, but frankly, I don't know them. This is just something that looks good to me, to my eyeball, and I just roll with it from there. So I guess that's what, like 1.5 millimeters? If that. I wish I was able to help you guys a little bit more, but that's basically all the info I can supply. Also, a quick little tip for bending grab handles. This is one that's great for use on all tank models, regardless of scale, is whenever you're doing a handle type fitting, the best way to come up with how big it is you put the piece in the hole, and then you put the plier right next to the edge of the hole on the inner portion. Because then you could go ahead and just bend it, and the handle will be a perfect size and will fit basically every single time. Okay, that's now bent to shape. Let me grab my wire cutters over here. Just add a little drop of super glue. Now I'm just going to fit in place. And there we go. It's a perfect fit. When you're dropping it in place, you want to make sure that the handle is sitting evenly, where it's not canted or anything. It's not in cockeyed or it's not shifted. You just want to just basically, again, eyeball it, make sure it's where it needs to be. And once it's fitted in place, like that guy right over there, you're all set. Just sit there and move on to the next one while this one sets and dries. On the last side, I was able to basically finish it off in less than 5 minutes. So again, once you get into a groove, it's actually quite quick when it comes time for doing this procedure. The only thing, again, you want to be aware of is not to add them to this row over here, because that's for the other handrail, which I'll show you how to fabricate in a moment. No point getting the rest on camera. Let's cut across to when that's ready to be done. 5 or so minutes later, here we have the turret with the grab handles fitted in place. Now it's time to go ahead and fabricate the top rail. For the top rail, I'm going to utilize a thicker piece of floor wire, and I'm going to first hit the sections here with some sandpaper. This is going to do two things. First, it's going to remove the paint on the surface over here, which is extremely important because I need to solder the thing together, and if the paint is on the surface, obviously the solder can't stick to it. The other reason is to, again, scuff up the surface to, once again, help the solder adhere and flow into the areas and then solidify in a stronger manner. So either way, it's definitely going to be a win. The best way to do this is just to run the sandpaper up and down the wire over here in order to get the needed or the desired look. You can use, I guess, a paint remover if you want to go that far. However, I don't think it's necessary, as the sandpaper does a decent enough job. With the paint on the wire removed, it's now time for the actual installation of the rail onto the side of the turret. And before I could do any of that, though, I need some masking tape. The purpose of this very sad little spool of masking tape is to go ahead and add a backing on the inner portion of the turret. Point of the backing is so I have something that the rods can bottom out on, which will allow me to get the lengths at the exact length that I need them to be. Otherwise, they could slide in, they could move out, and it just makes the installation just a little bit more problematic. As we can recall, I went ahead and drilled out these sections over here with the Dremel bit, so the rod's just going to fit basically freely in that location. However, before I do, on that note, I just remembered I have to drill out these holes a bit deeper. Because this wire here is thicker than the ones used for the other handles, I need to go ahead and enhance the holes here with the other drill bit. The drill bit I'm using is a 1.15 millimeter or a .0453 inch bit. Again, from the usual vendor. Oh, by the way, I made a mistake. That number for the pink one was not in millimeters. That was actually an inch. It's 0.0370 inches. As for what this is in millimeter, I couldn't tell you. All right, so that quick little addendum out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and drill these out. With the tape installed, I'm using this side here as an example of how many struts to cut. On the top rail itself, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 struts in total. So you just have to cut 5 of these to the exact same length. As for what that length is, well, I'm just going to basically eyeball it with the other one over here, just to make sure that the size is more or less where it needs to be. While on the topic of the pencil, takes us to the line that I drew, as I was mentioning before. Well, in addition to the horizontal line, I also drew vertical lines, and the vertical lines are indicating the holes that are going to be used for the struts. Otherwise, with the rear portion over here, we have these two little tie downs, and they are directly in path with the handrail. So it's one of those things where you can easily get confused on which hole is actually for which. So to prevent that from happening, just a horizontal line that it gets drawn, make sure work of that. With the size figured out, I went ahead and snipped the wire, and now I have my length to make the next units that need to match. As for how big this piece is, honestly, I couldn't tell you. If I was to take a guess, I'd say about 3.5, maybe 4 millimeters. I'm just winging it. It's basically, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch, give or take. So take that for what you will. Once all the pieces of metal are cut, it's then time to just do the install. Just a drop of glue, and then the piece just slips in place. Remember, you just want to feel a bottom out on the tape that's on the inside. When it comes to gluing these on, you could do it two ways. You either add a little drop of glue to the piece itself, like that. Little tight over here, but that's actually a good thing. Or you could take the piece and just add a little drop of glue to the inner portion of the hole so that the glue seeps in. Either way, you'll get the same result. It's just personal preference. For the last one, I'm going to go ahead and deburr this with a needle file because the piece actually just abruptly ends at this portion over here. So you don't want to have the cut portion of the wire, which tends to be like a TP shape due to the way the wire cutters work. The other ones are actually okay. In fact, you kind of want that because with that TP nature, if anyone's ever welded anything before, same thing applies, where once the solder goes in, it has the perfect little valley here to accumulate, which will give you more strength. But for the one on the end over here, the flat's the way to go. Alright. With all the pieces in place, you just want to do a visual check to make sure that the studs are more or less at the appropriate height. They don't have to be super exact, but you don't want to have them look like a skyline either. One that could use a slight little trimming, you could just either tap it in. This was the one that was stiff, by the way. Or you could just remove a little bit of material if need be. Like so. With that out of the way, it's now time to go ahead and bend the last piece of the wire to shape. But before I do that, I'm going to need to sand a little bit more of the paint off because I ran out of material over here due to the metal being used to make the studs. Go ahead and use a sandpaper. No point getting on camera. Let's skip across. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and bend this to shape. So if you look at the handrail on the reverse side, it starts from the rotor section, emerges out, bends around the curve here of the turret, and then goes straight and follows the curvature right here of the turret all the way to the last stanchion point right there. So it's a pretty simple bend to fabricate. Go ahead and insert this in place, and basically just bend it from here. After a second or two, you'll basically get the shape. At this point, before I go ahead and trim the wire, I'm actually going to go ahead and get the soldering equipment ready. So right here I have my soldering iron. This is just an Amazon special. Works great. I just crank it all the way up to the highest setting, and that's basically where I leave it to do all of my soldering work, be it for detail parts or even for just electrical. Alright, this guy here is plugged in. Getting nice and hot. Keep them away from the foam. That would be a bad thing. Alright, let's set them over here on a place that's not exactly a fire hazard. Some soldering flux. I got this stuff from, I believe, Home Depot or Lowe's. Either or. And a little bit of solder. This is a solder that came with the soldering iron. Normally I have my big spool of 60-40 solder, but unfortunately someone used it and didn't put it back where it belongs. But either way, I have this stuff here. It's more enough to do the job until the other one magically turns up. Once the iron heats up to a significant amount, I can then go ahead, add the flux to the pins over here, or I should say to the stanchions, and then just go ahead and solder them through. As for what that looks like, well, how do I know when the iron's ready? Well, when it makes this noise. Oh yeah, we're ready to roll. So in the flux here I have quite a bunch of little sticks and stuff from all the other soldering jobs I've done. And I'm just going to go ahead and a little drop of flux to each one of these sections. Just a little glob. You don't want to have too much on there. Just a small little dab will do you. That's it. That's all you really need. Alright, get the iron. When you're doing this type of procedure, you just want to do one at a time, and then they'll actually start reinforcing each other and act as a jig, and then by the time you get to the last one, the thing is actually pretty solid. Let's go ahead and melt some solder. And begin the weld. Or soldering. You just got to keep the iron onto the metal for a couple seconds or so. It's going to heat up the metal, and then that'll allow the solder to flow in place. The flux allows the solder to flow into the appropriate location much easier, which is why when you're doing soldering, the flux is a must-have. You don't want to have too much solder on the piece. You don't want a giant ball of it. Just a small little dab will just flow in and basically just solidify around the required areas. If the piece doesn't stick right away, just keep the iron onto the part. The metal will just heat up to the critical mass point where the solder will be at the right temperature to do what it needs to do. The only thing you have to do is just periodically just inspect to see if the solder is doing what you want. As I mentioned before, once you have one or two soldered in place, the rest will just fall in line. Because of the thinness of the metals over here, it doesn't take much time for the piece to heat up to the point where the solder likes to flow. And unlike plastic models, because this is die cast over here, you don't have to worry about any sort of collateral damage with the piece absorbing heat and melting. All you gotta do is just straighten the wire a little bit. Oh, no, this one needs to be redone. Looks like I wasn't on the money with this one, so that's okay. You just go ahead, reheat it, and adjust accordingly. It's one of those things that it's much easier to do when you're not on camera, because your head can go into certain areas, and you can visually align that way, as opposed to doing it trying to work around a camera. So it's definitely something to consider. But I am going through the paint over here just to make sure that you guys can all see how the sauce is made. Alright, this one here has too much solder on it built up, so I'm just going to have to go ahead and work around it. You can just blow it away or even flick it away if need be. And there we go. So the piece is very workable. You're not stuck in stone or anything like that. You just go ahead and work with what you're given. And you can adjust accordingly until you have the piece where you want it. Let me add a little more flux here. The last one kind of melted away due to the wire heating up. But a little drop of flux isn't exactly earth-shattering. Okay, at the final one, this is where we need to be very precise with it. So I'm going to go ahead and shorten this because this hook here is getting in the way of making sure the piece lies flat. So I'll just go ahead, snip this away. The reason why I'm leaving this tail on it over here is because it gives me a place to hold on to it, as opposed to it's really up close, my fingers can get burned. If you do have to go close like that, you could use a plier or something like that just to hold the piece until the piece eventually cools down to the point of touch. But with this length here, I think I should be alright. I don't expect getting any burns. And boy, have I burned myself quite a bit soldering. Just comes with the territory. Metal's getting hot. And I think I was able to do the job. A little extra material on there. I'm going to use the plier here just to hold it while I sculpt the bead. Perfect. Alright, now we're perfect. I'm going to plug the iron for the time being. And I'm going to snip this guy right here, flush against the handle. And now there's a small little burr left. Well, to take care of the burr, I'm just going to go ahead, take my needle file, and I'm simply just going to polish it down. There's a few swipes. That's really all that it takes. The metal is a soft metal, so taking care of the burr is something that's done fairly quickly. You could also go ahead and clean up the welds if you need to, but that's basically all there is. And that's it. You can see the handle is now done. If the piece has a little bend in it here or there, you can then go ahead and straighten accordingly with a plier, like so. And you can basically just torque it to shape and undo any minor bend that may arise. There we go. And there we have it. As you can see, this is much more cleaner and more accurate compared to the way the model was originally from the out-of-the-box stock metal counterpart. Once this is done, of course, you can rip off the tape backing on the inside. That's no longer necessary. I have to use a longer needle nose to get in there, but either way, the tape has got to go. That's all there is to it. With this out of the way, I can continue on the remainder of the tart revisions. Jumping forward a little bit takes to the point right here, and at this point here, the model detailing wise is done, and it's ready to slide off into paint. Briefly going back over the last of the hull details takes us to the front transmission cover, where you can see here we have the addition of the tow cable clamp as well as a little footrest. The tow cable clamp is the ECA cast rest one. There are two on this model. One is here, one is located on the back of the hull. You will see that as the video continues. But the one on the front here is in this location. What's interesting to point out is that the M10 is different from the remainder of the Sherman family vehicles on the layout of the tow cable mount. On a normal Sherman, the tow cable is actually a mirror image, and it's on this side here of the transmission cover because the cable runs along the driver's side section of the vehicle. On the M10 and M36 family, it's reversed, and so because of that, the cable mount is in the opposite location. As for the little step section over here, it's just a piece of angle that's welded to the front portion here. This is just a piece of plastruct angle glued on, and then a little bit of epoxy sculpt was added as weld beads for good measure. And it's not found on any of the standard Shermans. On that note, one thing that should be on this model, but I am not going to add it, is another little detail found right here on the front transmission cover. If you look at most M10s and M36s, they have a little step section that's built into this area over here, and it's made out of some thin wrought iron that's bent to shape and then welded together, and then welded to the transmission cover itself. Well, this is something that could easily have scratch built, no problem, and have done out of metal strip. However, I didn't because it's really problematic for this model over here, as this is an extremely prolific snag point. This is something that would not last long at all if this thing is driven, which the owner is going to do quite often with this model. It's going to bump into stuff. Also, the way you pick this model up, you generally put your hand right over here and boom, you're going to break it off. Even if the piece is made out of metal, it's still going to be really suspect to breakage. So I have to play it safe on this one, and I'm not going to fit it. If I was doing my own, if this was my build, yes, I would have most certainly added it. However, for this one over here, I have to go ahead and err on not adding it. However, this is not necessarily an inaccuracy because these things here could break off in field, and also it's not uncommon for these units to be switched around, so it's very probable that a unit was damaged and they just threw on a transmission that they had on hand from an M4 Sherman. Having said that, it still has the M10 specific details that I mentioned before, but it's still something that's not necessarily inaccurate, but it would be a lot more prototypical if I did add that detailing to this portion over here. Also, on this location over here, you get to see the addition of a siren. This siren here is a spare component that I had on hand. It's a HD 3D printed component from shapeways.com. I haven't said that name in quite some time. I went ahead and bought this set years ago for another project, and it gave me several spare parts, and I had a couple of these larger pattern of sirens included. So I went ahead and utilized this for this build. I really wish I didn't have to do that because these pieces are now worth gold as they don't exist anymore, but for this build over here, the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. The piece itself was mounted to a scratch-built bracket, just a piece of sheet metal that was bent to shape, added to the appropriate location. Some sculpted weld beads were added to give extra detail and also support. And for good measure, on the opposite side, you can see the power cable that emerges from the integrally printed on nipple found on the bottom portion of the siren, and that just goes right into the hull. Before departing on the front, you get to see the brush guard as well as the lift hook, and I went ahead and added some sculpted weld beads to these areas over here because I had some extra epoxy on hand from doing some other welds, and, well, why not? It definitely makes the model look that much more complete. Same was also done to the back portion as well that we will be seeing momentarily. Moving our way topside takes to the tow cable cleats. I've mentioned these before. These are the same ones found on the standard Sherman tank. These are the ECA cast rest ones. Normally, again, these would be on the reverse side of the vehicle if it's a standard M4A3, but M10, M36, they are located on this side. And note the positioning of these pieces on the top deck. This is exactly true to form as it would be on the real one. Going back further takes to the rear engine deck, and here you get to see some mods that were also made. First, we can have our eyes over here to the tow cable clamp. This is the same one that I mentioned before for the front. Well, the other version's right here on the back section, and we'll just simply mount it in place. On the fluid filler caps, I went ahead and added the pull pin details. These are apps on the stock unit, and just simply fabricated out of some lengths of wire that were just bent and mounted to the appropriate locations. The engine grills also received a little bit of detailing added to these three little struts over here. On the real Sherman tank, these are actually weld beads. They're not these nice little precise bars that we like to see on these models. They are just weld beads, and they're not really that clean on the real ones. They're kind of, well, let's just say if there were pictures posted on Facebook on some welder group, you're gonna have some guy claiming that they're garbage and that they could do a better one. But anyway, to replicate that detailing here, I went ahead and utilized the sculpted red putty trick, where I showed this a few videos in the past on a 116 Sherman, no less, where I take some tape and I add it to these areas over here. I smear on the putty and I go ahead and etch it with an X-Acto knife dipped in paint thinner. Once this stuff dries, I peel off the tape and I now have a nice little clean line of weld that remains. The welds are only in these 3 locations here, and once it's painted and weathered, it's really going to look the part. On the reverse side, you can see the fire extinguisher now mounted to its little well. The well was cleaned up a little bit. I added a piece of sheet styrene for the floor, so it makes it nice and smooth, and then the ECA cast resting piece just gets mounted directly in place. After it's painted and weathered, you'll see how much color gives this section over here. Also added to the engine grills are the mounting fasteners that would, on the real vehicle, secure these in place. There are 4 total, 2 on each of the grills. And the way this works is this would keep the grills in place and would prevent them from flopping around when the tank is operating. Well, to get access to the hatch, you take your spanner wrench, remove these guys, and then you could go ahead and lift the grates. On these ones over here, they're just some faux bits of detailing. I drilled holes into the appropriate locations, snipped some wire brads to the right size, secured them in place, and as you can see, you have your detailing, but you still have the functionality of the piece left uninhibited. And this brings us to the very last bit of detailing on the rear, and that is with the travel lock. Here you can see the travel lock fitted in place. It's the ECA version, as we mentioned before, and the travel lock on the Jackson is actually quite interesting. So it utilizes the same A-frame that I mentioned before. However, it has this little mount that's located right here on the top portion of the engine hatch, and then there is this bracket that connects the two. I haven't fabricated the bracket just yet. I'm going to take care of that off camera out of some lengths of metal, but basically it then ties it in this area and it prevents it from flopping around. When you need to use a travel lock, there's a pin that's chain retained. You pop that, this thing pivots open, and then you could use it to secure the main armament in place for travel use. On the piece over here, I fabricated the adapter bar, which is just basically just some strips of steel that would have been welded to the piece with a little nub over here to connect it to that bracket. The bracket is just welded to this portion here of the hull, and that's basically all there is to it. It's a pretty simple adaptation of the standard M4A3 pattern of travel lock, or M4 pattern travel lock, I should say. The other thing that's interesting, though, is with the retention latch. That is right here. And on a standard Sherman, it would connect to this little hole that's built in, and it's usually located on the back of it. So this would lean back, and then it will clip in place and prevent it from moving around. But on the M36, this piece can actually hinge all the way flat and actually could secure it in that position. As for why that's an option, more likely it's to get access to the engine deck, if I was to take a guess. But on the piece over here, the ECA one was used and just simply mounted in this location. However, to do that, I still have to do another modification to the rear, besides adding the welds, as I was referencing before, and that has to do with the pry bar. The pry bar is one of those details that are absent on the Mato M36, and I wouldn't be surprised the same is true for the M10. And the pry bar here is just fabricated with the old school technique, one that I haven't used probably since I did the M50 Sherman in this scale many years ago. And it's one that was fun to dig up. So in order to fabricate the pry bar, I take some Plastruct square stock, and for the one here on the back, I cut it to length, and then I just round the corners off because it's just sheet metal that's just folded over to create the holster for the piece to slip in place. And then for the one on the front, I had to do a little bit more creativity with it. So I took the block, I added the angle section here on the front, and the piece is actually open on the top portion of the real unit. Well, to mimic this, I take the piece and I put it in my mill, and with a very small micro router bit, I carefully mill a slot into this section over here. Once that's completed, I then go ahead, drill a hole in the centers of each, and I take a piece of 1/16 of an inch wire, cut it to length, and I glue it to either side, and that gets secured to the model. Once the piece is painted and weathered, this will give the illusion that it is just a casing for the pry bar, and we have the remaining of the pry bar interior section found on the inside. And that's when the panel line accent's really going to become very handy. Moving up brings us to the revised turret. So since the rails were done, I went ahead and added the cast texturing to the rear bustle section for the reasons that I mentioned before. However, you'll notice that there are two techniques of cast texturing that has been applied to the model. For the bottom sections, I utilized the red putty technique that I used on the transmission cover, the bogie housings, as well as the mantlet, which we'll see what that looks like in a minute. But for the top portion, I went with the brushed-on texture paint technique that I've also shown on a few other builds on the channel in the past. The reason why I went with the two techniques is because the putty technique is fantastic for adding cast texturing to the model, but it's best done when there's no real detailing found in these locations. On the top portion here, the bustle, we have all that nice little fastener details that's integrally molded in to give you the detailing for the mounting points on the ammunition rack that I again mentioned earlier. Well, with the brush-on technique, it gives you a lot more flexibility and precision with adding the texture in the places that need it, and you want to avoid the places that don't, while on the other areas, I could use the red putty technique, and it just basically all fuses together right here in the middle, and it looks the part quite well. Once it's painted and weathered, it will blend in very nicely. Once the cast texturing was done, I then went ahead and added the sculpted well beads to the appropriate locations. And they were added to the bottom portion as well. You can see how the thing would have been fabricated on the real unit, where it would have been attached in this area here, and then a weld bead would go ahead and weld everything together. However, the turret was actually in two halves. As you can see, there's that center weld bead right there down the spine. After the texturing was done, I then found the original holes that were buried under the putty, and I went ahead, drilled them out, and I added the other tie-down points, as again, that I mentioned earlier. On the rear section, you get to see the details added in place. The 50 cal storage equipment is retaining the original one with the bracket that we have here. Just simply remounted the model with some weld beads added for extra support and detailing, while I have a replacement storage pintle, this one here being the ECA unit. It's the old cast wrestle one. It's still in perfectly good shape and was simply just casted, assembled, and mounted as is. On the top portion over here where we have the 50 cal spare barrel mounting equipment, I went ahead and added the weld beads to the appropriate locations, and that's really all that was needed to add, with the exception of a small little drop of glue just to make sure the pieces don't wiggle around, as they were a little loose on the model originally. Continuing forward takes to the mantlet. You can see what it looks like with the cast texturing added in place. That's the only thing that I added to the mantlet. The rest of the mantlet's 100% stock because, frankly, the kit one's quite well done. Just a little bit of cast texturing is all that was needed to make it stand out. The other thing I want to mention is with these caps that we have here on either side of the rotor. On the kit, the detailing is there, however, drilled unsightly in the center portion is the mounting fastener that keeps the armament in place. And it's a bit unsightly, so what I did was on the lathe, I turned down some cast resin into a little cover that we have right here. After the pieces were machined, they were then mounted on top of this area, and the way it works is they are hollow on the inside, and it has the clearance for the mounting fastener, so the piece just pops on directly over. It covers the piece up. You don't have that unsightly fastener anymore, but it still retains, obviously, the functionality of the piece is left uninhibited. This is something that I'm more likely going to go ahead and design a dedicated 3D printed set, and that's more likely something that's going to be added to the ECA catalog, but that remains to be seen. And speaking of new added items to the ECA catalog, takes us to the new ECA M36 90mm thread protector. This is a new bit of equipment that I mentioned in a previous video, and here you get to see it fitted in place. The piece is a simple install, however, it's not exactly a drop-in. You are going to have to give the piece a little bit of a circumcision by removing just the tip portion here of the integrally built-in thread protector, and then once that's removed, the new one just plugs directly in place. Obviously, when you're drilling this out, making sure that the cut is absolutely as square and straight as possible is paramount, but once that's accomplished and you just deburr with a needle file or so, the new addition just slides directly in place, plugs in, drop a glue later, and you are good to go. Because the piece is hollow, it does not inhibit at all the light emitting feature found on the flash, or if you have the little vape pen poof system, obviously because it's hollow, the smoke will just go right out of the barrel section without any sort of issues. Here's the original unit right over here. Like I mentioned before, you could just use the bottom portion here of the thread protector as a guide to make the incision to cut the piece off. And as I also showed in the other video, how basic the standard one is and how much an improvement it is with the new 3D printed resin unit added in place. It's really going to look awesome once the model progresses past this point and gets its coat of paint. With the remainder of the vehicle all squared away, this brings us to the 50 cal. Of course, the M2HB is the cherry on top of the sundae, being the American armored fighting vehicle, and this one here is no exception. So, on this one here, I'm doing something a little bit different compared to some of the other more recent builds. Actually, this kind of harkens back to some of my older 1/16 builds, but I don't want to digress too much into that. So, generally on the other builds I've done recently in the past, I would go ahead and replace the stock M2HB with an aftermarket one that used to be 3D printed from Shapeways. Sadly, rest in peace, Shapeways is no longer with us, or the catalog of Shapeways is no longer with us, which honestly does suck, but so because of that, the old cradles and M2s I used to use went up in smoke. So for this one here, I'm actually just polishing up the Kit Supplied M2HB. And I did this for two reasons. First, the Shapeways ones are no longer in existence. There are a plastic, it's actually a very nice M2HB, it's on the market from Tacom. However, that's one of those things where if you like it, you might want to jump on it sooner than later, because those are the type of things that they make a run of them and then they dry up, and next thing you know, you're paying collector prices. So that's something that you might want to jump on sooner than later. Again, if you were watching one of these videos, around the time this video gets posted. The other reason why I'm keeping the kit one, it has to do with both time constraints and also with the type of operation and running that the customer has in mind for this build. The customer does want to run the tank a bit more frequently, and because of that, the replacement of the metal one here with a better detailed polymer one or 3D printed one may be problematic because it may be subject to breaking. One thing I gotta say, those other M2s that I used to use on those other builds, they are fantastic, they're gorgeous, but they are very, very frail and fragile. And for the type of running that the customer likes to do with this type of build over here, maybe that's not exactly the best for his needs. So in this case, the original simplistic metal one is going to be probably the best way to go. Now, just because it's simplistic, that doesn't mean I'm just going to leave it stock. Oh, no, no, no. I'm going to go ahead and polish it up slightly, and basically that's what we have right here. So here we have the stock unit, but it's been improved quite a bit in order to just further enhance it compared to the way it was with its original condition. So the first thing I want to mention is with the butterfly grip right there. This was made out of a piece of soda can aluminum. I drew the shape on the aluminum, cut it carefully, the shape with a scissor, bent it, and then glued it in place. This brings us also to the rear sight. The thing had no sights whatsoever on the top portion. It's extremely naked up there. So again, as I frequently reference, just because it's metal doesn't mean it's better. That definitely comes in fruition with this guy over here. The sight over here and the wings are all fabricated out of strips of styrene strip, some Plastruct. Went ahead, cut everything to shape, glued it to the rudimentary shape that we have here. It's definitely simplistic, but it's way improved compared to the way we saw it before. And with the scale, once everything's painted weathered, it should do the job quite nicely. The charging handle was added. This is a piece of scrap 3D printed sprue that I had floating around. Actually, I think these were the sprues for the track racks that are actually used on this vehicle, oddly enough. But anyway, I drilled a hole into the piece over into the receiver, slid the piece in, and that's all good to go. The front sight was integrally molded in, the blade at least, but the hood was absent, so I quickly just bent a piece of soda can aluminum to the hood section, glued it in place, and finished that off. On the top portion of the top cover, there is the large plug that is for holding the internal mechanism for the belt mechanism, and that is absent on the stock one, so I drilled a hole in the top of the feature cover over here and just put in a nice little sewing pin to give you that extra bit of detailing. While on that note, with a hacksaw, I cut on the two little seams here and here to simulate where the top cover would be hinged. On the front portion over here, I revised the geometry here of the carry handle. It was kind of wonky with its original shape. It's actually much more slimmer, and basically this is the shape that we would have here. What I did was I just bent the unit to shape. I just crushed it a little bit with the plier, and the piece did snap over here because it widened out. But as a quick fix, what I literally did was I took a piece of thin heat shrink tubing, slid it in place, hit it with the heat gun, and ta-da, now we have a new handle, and it encompasses the original one perfectly and bridges the gap. It was actually a pretty quick modification. And that's all there is. I kept the original ammo can, trying to replace that. Again, it's a little too problematic. So, for what we have over here, is it perfect? No, but it should definitely, it's way better than the way it was stock. And for the purposes of this build, I think it's a good happy medium, and it should definitely pull the job off quite nicely. Moving forward a little bit further takes to the point we're at here where the model is going through its completion. At this time, the model has been painted, weathered, varnished, and also the fine little details have been painted as well, such as the shiny silver sections here found on the various pieces of running gear, which I'll circle back to in a moment. One thing I want to mention at this time is that the tank is actually ready for the tracks to be fitted in place, but one thing that I wanted to mention, I forgot to get it on camera earlier, is with the rubber tires. So obviously the model has rubber tires on the wheels as I shown earlier, and when this may come to be a bit problematic for some people out there in terms of painting. Normally, you would go ahead and remove the wheels, which will allow you easy access to go ahead and paint everything off the tank. However, with these ones here, you can't do that. The wheels are not able to be removed like they are, say, on a Tegan or even a Henlong, for example. Well, for paint work, some people may feel inclined to go ahead and mask up the tires just to prevent them from getting oversprayed. However, I can tell you firsthand that is going to be a fool's errand and is just not going to work. The reason why is quite simply put, this rubber material, the tape just will not stick to. However, this is actually a benefit because the paint, or I should say the tape ain't going to stick to it, but so will neither the paint. So the model, and the same was also true with the other Sherman that I did a little while ago, where you just paint directly over the rubber tires. Fear not, just prime, paint over everything, and then at the very tail end, like where I'm at now, once the weathering is all done and the varnish is all done, you can then go ahead and chip the paint off. The paint chips off the rubber tires ridiculously easy. Basically, all you gotta do is just pinch the rubber tires like this and flick them a bit, and the paint just disintegrates and just flakes away without any sort of harm being done to the remainder of the wheel or the suspension. Also, to help with this, have my X-Acto over here. I basically open up the blade like this, place it just parallel onto the surface, and I just rotated the wheel, and the paint just flaked right over the blade area, leaving for the rubber tire underneath. I did not go ahead and scratch the tire or remove any sort of rubber with that procedure. It's just the paint that flaked off of the surface. In fact, you can probably see some of the areas here. Hang on. Okay, so here goes a paint chip right here that flaked off one portion of the tire in question. As you can see, it's the primer that I use on the bottom, and then the layers of olive drab on the top. Whatever flakes and left could just be blown away with the air gun here on my air compressor, just some compressed air, and it just blows away absolutely harmlessly. While on this portion over here, you can see the shiny bits that have been painted at this time. This is best done before the tracks are fitted in place. If anyone's a frequent viewer of my Sherman content, you'll know exactly what's going on over here. So on the Sherman, the specifically one with the VVSS, the rear idler and the return rollers are steel. They're not rubber rimmed. They never were. They never will be. And so on the model over here, I just basically paint the surfaces here with the silver paint, giving it for the polished look that would be extremely common on these vehicles in real life. Same is also true for the face here of all of the return rollers. However, in addition to that, I also go ahead and add a swipe of paint to the top skids over here, because obviously this is where the track is going to roll over these areas, and the only thing this thing ever does is make contact with the track. So obviously paint is not going to last on these surfaces for very long. Also fitted at this time are the tank's sprockets. So the sprockets are just remounted to the model in the reverse procedure that I mentioned earlier in the video. And at this time here, I just want to mention a small little drop of red Loctite was utilized for the fastener just to prevent it from getting loose. And when it comes for the red Loctite, you just want to use the most minuscule of a drop as you can humanly possibly add. This is important because for whatever reason, if you need to remove the fastener, the little bit of red Loctite, even though it's the strong stuff, is overcome by the use of the wrench without causing any collateral damage to the fastener. The more Loctite you use, this is where things start becoming problematic. So if you use just the tiniest, just abysmally tiniest little drop of red Loctite, it does the job, where it keeps the thing in place and it's breakable if the need be does arise. And this brings us to the hub. So the hub gets threaded on. However, what I like to do to keep the hubs in place is I also like to add some kind of a additive to the threads here just to prevent it from backing out, specifically with the thing in operation. The last thing you want is this nice, beautiful model over here driving around and boop, whoop, this piece falls off and now you're screwed. So in order to thwart that from happening, you could use Loctite, but Loctite might be a bit problematic for this. So, because it may be a little bit trickier to remove, because unlike the other one, there's no wrench for this. This is all done by hand screwing, and you really don't want to use red Loctite for that, I find. So what you can do is just use a little bit here of white glue. The white glue is a temporary type bond where it's strong enough to hold it for just standard running, but if you want to pop the thing open, it doesn't give you really much resistance. Once you line up into its magic sweet spot, you just basically just thread it on like I am right here with the use of your thumb. Once you bottom it out, the installation is complete. At this point here, this thing is ready for the addition of the tracks, but before I do want to go ahead and add the powder foul or the exhaust soot fouling here to the exhaust manifolds, because it's easier to do that now as opposed to when the tracks are fitted in place. The model is now done. That's right, the last paintwork has been added, the last detail fitting has been fitted in place, and there's nothing that needs to be done further on this model besides getting it charged up, so I can go ahead and take it out for a test drive, as well as bring it to table to record the remainder of the video. As you can see, currently the model is getting a nice little charge right now, and this leads me to the very last thing that needs to have been added to the tank, and it's not anything that has to do with detail, it actually has to do with the battery. Here's the original battery right here that we saw in the beginning portion of the video. And unfortunately, when I went to test the model after it was completed, the battery was dead as a doornail. Tried hooking up to the charger, didn't want to take a charge, so the battery needed to have been replaced. Went ahead and contacted the customer. He went ahead and procured a new battery from Toucan Hobby, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, the tank now has another LiPo battery, just like this one over here, but just from a slightly different make. The installation, of course, is easily done. It's a quick swap out. The battery's held in with those two Velcro straps. Undid the Velcro, dropped the new one in, plugged everything in place, and went ahead and reassembled the model. I did go ahead and bench tested it, so everything is operable at this time. I just need to go ahead and wait for this thing to turn green so I could go ahead and put some models on the tracks. And it's a really good thing that I went ahead and fabricated the recharge jack extender for this model over here, because the original battery actually had a pretty decent length on its recharge jack system, as you can see. However, with the new battery, the recharge stem is much shorter in comparison, and it would be impossible to go ahead and recharge it through the open engine hatch like I have here. But with the ECA piece, or with this piece in particular, it just patches directly in, and now I can charge the battery without any sort of issues. Once the battery is done, I just simply unplug it over there, stuff the wire back in, close the hatch, and we're off to the races. However, that's going to be discussed in more depth in the third installment of this video, where again, I take this thing for a test drive. And well, with that wraps up part 1 of this 3-part video series for the 1/16 scale radio-controlled M36 Jackson tank destroyer. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/16 scale model showcase video series like this one over here, or my other type of content being small scale model showcase videos and 1/6 scale project update videos when they get posted. Another way to keep in a loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on part 2. See you there!